For nearly 70 years, the galaxy believed humanity was afraid of war, and nobody questioned that belief because every time an alien power threatened Earth, humanity remained silent. Every time a galactic council fleet entered Terran territory, Earth issued no aggressive response. Every time an alien diplomat demanded that humans surrender military technology, the Terran government simply listened. And every time another civilization mocked humanity as a primitive species hiding behind a small planetary defense force, the humans said nothing. But what the galaxy didn't understand was that humanity's silence had never been fear. It had been preparation. And on the morning the galaxy finally decided to test Earth's weakness, Admiral Kale of the Dravarian Empire stood inside the command bridge of the largest warship ever constructed outside the Terran system, staring at a blue planet, surrounded by what appeared to be a handful of outdated human defense vessels. Behind him stood representatives from 14 allied civilizations, all convinced that the coming operation would take less than 6 hours. Earth had refused to join the Galactic Military Accord for decades, refused to reveal the full extent of its weapons technology, and refused to participate in the Council's expansion campaigns. To the galaxy, humanity looked isolated, stubborn, and frightened. The Dravarian Empire had decided that was enough. Their emperor wanted Earth's resources, Earth's shipyards, and most importantly, Earth's mysterious technology. Because although humans rarely displayed advanced weapons, their scientific progress had accelerated at a rate no other civilization could explain. Human colonies had appeared. Across distant systems, mining stations had been established near dangerous stars, and strange automated structures had been detected beyond the known galactic frontier. But whenever the Council asked humanity what those structures were, the Terran government gave the same answer: defensive infrastructure. The Dravarians laughed at that answer. They believed humans were building walls because they were afraid of the galaxy. So Admiral Kale had been given permission to invade. His fleet consisted of more than 2,000 warships, supported by hundreds of carrier vessels, and millions of combat drones. It was considered an unstoppable military force. When the fleet entered the outer Terran system, Kale ordered a transmission to Earth: surrender your military facilities, deactivate your planetary defenses, and accept Dravarian administration. If you resist, your civilization will be removed from the galactic order. The message was transmitted toward Earth, and the galaxy waited for the response. 1 minute passed, then 5, then 20. Nothing happened. Kale smiled. "They're frightened," a Dravarian commander said. "Exactly as expected." Another officer laughed. "Perhaps humanity finally understands its position." But then a Terran transmission arrived. Only 6 words. "We acknowledge your presence." Kale stared at the message. "Is that all?" The communications officer nodded. "That's everything." Kale laughed. "They didn't even threaten us." The invasion fleet continued forward, crossing the outer defense boundary without resistance. No missiles appeared, no fighter squadrons launched, no orbital weapons activated, and no human warships moved toward them. Instead, every Terran vessel slowly withdrew toward Earth, making the Dravarian commanders even more confident. "They are retreating," one officer announced. Kale smiled. "Tell the fleet to advance. Earth is surrendering without a fight." But somewhere beneath the surface of Earth, in a facility that did not exist on any galactic map, General Marcus Vance watched the same fleet approaching. Around him stood thousands of engineers, military officers, scientists, and technicians. None of them looked afraid. Vance looked at the central display and asked, "How many have crossed the first boundary?" An officer replied, "Approximately 1,200. Vance nodded. "Continue monitoring," another officer asked. "General, should we activate the outer defense grid?" Vance shook his head. "Not yet." The officer looked confused. "But they're already inside." "The system," Vance replied. "I know. Let them come closer." The young officer hesitated. "What if they attack Earth?" Vance looked at him calmly and said, "Then we'll know they're ready." The officer didn't understand, but General Vance did, because humanity had spent the last 70 years preparing for exactly this moment. The galaxy had been watching the wrong thing. While alien civilizations studied Earth's visible military forces, humans had quietly built an enormous defense network throughout the solar system. Hidden shipyards existed beneath moons, inside asteroids, beneath oceans, and even within artificial structures disguised as natural planetary formations. The Terran government had never announced these projects because revealing them would destroy the greatest strategic advantage humanity possessed: secrecy. Earth had learned from its own history that the strongest weapon wasn't always the weapon with the largest firepower. Sometimes it was the weapon your enemy didn't know existed. Admiral Kale finally reached the final Terran defense line, and what he saw made him laugh again. Only 43 human ships were waiting there, all older designs, all apparently underpowered. Kale opened a communication channel. "Humans, your final defense fleet is surrounded. You have no chance of survival. Surrender now." The Terran commander answered calmly. "We recommend that you turn around." Kale smiled. "Why?" "Because you are afraid." There was a pause, then the human commander replied, "No, because we don't want you to make a decision you'll regret." Kale immediately ordered his fleet to attack. Thousands of weapons charged at once. The darkness of space filled with missiles, plasma beams, and energy weapons, but just before the first attack reached the human ships, every Terran vessel disappeared, Kale shouted. "Where did they go?" The tactical officers stared at the sensors. "They're still here, but our systems can't track them." Then the stars behind the Dravarian fleet began changing. One by one, distant points of light suddenly vanished. Then thousands of new signals appeared. Across the battlefield, Kale's tactical display began filling with red warnings. The officer whispered, "Admiral, I'm detecting ships. How many?" The answer came slowly. 1,000, then 3,000, then 10,000. Kale stood frozen as the entire battlefield changed. Enormous Terran warships emerged from cloaking fields surrounding the Dravarian fleet from every direction. Behind them came carriers, destroyers, battleships, missile platforms, and massive vessels larger than anything the Dravarians had ever seen. 10,000 ships appeared in perfect formation, their weapons already powered, their engines glowing against the darkness. And at the center of the formation was a gigantic Terran battleship that had never appeared in any intelligence report. Admiral Kale stared at the impossible fleet and whispered, "Where did they come from?" The Terran commander opened the communication channel one final time. And this time his voice carried no anger, no fear, and no hatred, only absolute certainty. "You spent 70 years watching us remain silent." Kale swallowed hard. The commander continued, "You thought silence meant weakness, but humanity was never silent because we were afraid. We were silent because we were building." Kale looked at the 10,000 warships surrounding his fleet, and for the first time in his military career he realized the terrible truth. Earth had never been defenseless. Earth had simply been waiting. The battlefield remained completely silent for several seconds as Admiral Kale stared at the impossible fleet surrounding him. Every tactical display aboard the Dravarian flagship was flooded with new contacts, and the numbers kept rising. 10,000 Terran warships had not merely appeared near the battlefield, they had appeared around it, forming a perfectly coordinated sphere that trapped the entire invasion force inside. Kale immediately understood what that meant. Humanity had not rushed a fleet to defend Earth. Humanity had already known exactly where the invasion fleet would be. One of his officers spoke with a trembling voice. "Admiral, we're detecting synchronized targeting locks from every Terran vessel." Kale looked at the display and felt a cold sensation run through his body. Every ship in his fleet was already targeted. Every carrier, every destroyer, every command vessel, humanity had positioned their weapons before the Dravarians even realized they were surrounded. Kale quickly opened a communication channel. "All ships prepare for emergency retreat." But before the order could be transmitted, every communication system aboard the fleet suddenly shut down. Another officer looked horrified. "Sir, they're jamming us!" Kale shouted. "Impossible! No known civilization can suppress communications across an entire fleet." The officer shook his head. "Then humanity can, across the battlefield." The massive Terran fleet remained motionless, their weapons charged but unfired, their formations perfect, disciplined, and terrifyingly calm. General Marcus Vance watched everything from Earth and finally gave a small nod. 70 years of preparation had worked exactly as planned. Humanity's greatest weapon had never been its ships. It had been patience. While alien civilizations competed for territory, political influence, and military prestige, humans had quietly expanded beyond the attention of the Galactic Council. Hidden shipyards had produced warships in complete secrecy. Artificial intelligence systems had coordinated construction across hundreds of systems, and entire fleets had been stationed in locations no alien civilization knew existed because humanity had learned an important lesson from history. If everyone knows how strong you are, they will spend their lives preparing to fight you. But if nobody knows how strong you are, they will eventually make a mistake. Admiral Kale had just made that mistake. Inside the Galactic Council chambers, representatives from dozens of civilizations watched the live battlefield feed in stunned silence. Only hours earlier they had expected Earth's surrender. Now they were watching the largest military ambush in galactic history, one council member whispered. "That's impossible," another replied. "Those ships don't exist in any registry," a third representative looked pale. Humanity hid 10,000 warships from the entire galaxy. Then the Terran commander finally transmitted another message. "Dravarian fleet, power down your weapons and prepare for escort out of Terran territory." Kale stared at the screen in disbelief. "Escort," the commander replied calmly. "Humanity has no interest in conquest. We are offering you an opportunity to leave peacefully," one of Kale's officers shouted. "Admiral, we can still fight. Our fleet is powerful enough to break through one side of their formation." Kale looked around the tactical display and realized the officer was wrong. The Terran ships were larger, more advanced, and positioned perfectly. But something else worried him even more. The humans weren't acting like a civilization preparing for war. They were acting like a civilization completely certain of victory, and that certainty terrified him more than any weapon. Suddenly another alert appeared. The officer's face turned white. "Admiral, new contacts detected." Kyle looked at the numbers and felt his stomach drop. More Terran fleets were arriving. Not hundreds of ships, not thousands. Entire battle groups were emerging across the system, each one heavily armed and positioned around key strategic locations. Kale whispered, "How many fleets do they have?" Nobody answered because nobody knew. Then the largest Terran battleship activated a massive holographic display visible across the battlefield, showing hundreds of star systems spread across the galaxy. Kale recognized many of them immediately. They were remote systems believed to be unexplored, abandoned, or economically insignificant. The Terran commander spoke again. "For 70 years, the galaxy assumed humanity was isolated. What you failed to realize is that while you were watching Earth, humanity expanded elsewhere." The map zoomed outward, revealing thousands of Terran colonies, hidden shipyards, research stations, military outposts, and industrial worlds, entire regions of space that the Galactic Council had never even known were inhabited. Council representatives watching the transmission looked horrified. One whispered, "That's not a planetary civilization." Another answered, "That's an empire." But the Terran commander immediately corrected them. "No, humanity is not an empire. We do not rule conquered worlds. Every colony joined us voluntarily. Every system was built through cooperation, not conquest, and that is why we survived while others fought endless wars." Admiral Kale realized the truth in that moment. The galaxy had completely misunderstood humanity. Humans had never refused expansion because they were weak. They had refused conquest because they didn't need it. While other civilizations spent centuries fighting over territory, humanity had simply gone farther away and built more. Suddenly, an emergency signal interrupted every display, an automated warning from the outer edge of the galaxy. At first, nobody paid attention, but then more signals appeared, then hundreds more, and within minutes the entire Galactic Council network was flooded with distress calls. General Vance immediately turned toward his intelligence officers. "Report," an officer responded. "Multiple colonies are under attack," Vance frowned. "By who?" The answer came moments later. "Unknown vessels, thousands of them." Kale looked confused. "These aren't Terran ships," another officer added. "Sir, they're attacking Dravarian worlds too across the galaxy." Planets belonging to dozens of civilizations suddenly began reporting the same thing. Enormous unidentified fleets emerging from deep space without warning, destroying military installations and communication networks. A council representative shouted, "What is happening?" Then one final transmission arrived from a frontier colony moments before it was destroyed. The image showed a black warship larger than a city moving through space, followed by thousands of identical vessels, and painted across the hull of every ship was a symbol that nobody recognized. Silence filled the council chamber. Then General Vance spoke quietly. "We know that symbol." Every eye turned toward him. Vance looked grim. "Humanity encountered it 32 years ago beyond the galactic frontier," a council member immediately demanded. "Then why didn't you tell us?" Vance replied. "Because nobody would have believed us," another representative asked. "What are they?" Vance remained silent for several seconds before answering. "The reason we built 10,000 warships," Admiral Kale stared at the human commander, suddenly understanding something that made him feel far worse than fear. Humanity had not built those fleets to fight the Galactic Council. Humanity had built them for something else entirely. Something so dangerous that 10,000 warships were considered necessary. Then every Terran ship in the battlefield suddenly changed formation. Their weapons no longer pointed toward the Dravarian fleet. Instead, they turned toward deep space. Kale watched in confusion. The Terran commander opened one final channel and spoke to every civilization listening across the galaxy. "For decades, you mistook our silence for fear. The truth is much worse. We were preparing for the day this enemy returned." Another alarm sounded across every ship, and a new contact appeared on the tactical displays. Not one vessel, not one fleet, but an armada stretching across thousands of kilometers, emerging from hyperspace at the edge of the system. Kyle looked at the impossible number of enemy ships and whispered, "Dear stars." General Vance stared at the screen and quietly gave the order humanity had hoped never to use: activate Protocol Ragnarok, because the real war was finally beginning. The Galactic Council had spent the next 6 hours trying to understand what had happened in the Terran system. But every attempt to explain the 10,000 warships only created more questions, because the more intelligence analysts examined the fleet, the more impossible it became. The ships were not old military reserves. They were not unmanned drones, and they were not simple copies of a single design. The Terran fleet contained hundreds of different classes of vessels, each designed for a specific purpose, and every ship appeared to be equipped with technology decades ahead of anything known in the galaxy. While the Dravarian fleet remained powerless inside the solar system, Admiral Kale received a second transmission from Earth. This time, General Marcus Vance appeared on the screen. "Admiral, your fleet has two choices. You can withdraw peacefully, or you can remain where you are and continue negotiating." Kale stared at him. "You expect us to simply leave?" Vance answered. "Yes," Kale asked. "After you humiliated an Imperial fleet in front of the entire galaxy." Vance shook his head. "We didn't humiliate you. You brought an invasion fleet into our territory and discovered that you had underestimated us." Kale leaned forward. "Why didn't you attack us?" Vance was silent for several seconds before answering. "Because we don't want your soldiers to die for an emperor's mistake." Those words spread across the galaxy faster than any military announcement, and suddenly civilizations that had once considered humanity arrogant began questioning their own assumptions. Humans had demonstrated overwhelming military superiority and still refused to destroy an enemy that had invaded them. But then something unexpected happened. The Dravarian Emperor rejected the withdrawal order. Kyle received a private transmission instructing him to activate the fleet's emergency antimatter systems and destroy the Terran defensive line at any cost. Kyle stared at the message in disbelief. "Your Majesty, we cannot win." The Emperor's answer was simple. "Then make them bleed." Kale closed his eyes, because he knew what would happen if he obeyed, but he also knew what would happen if he refused. The Dravarian Empire did not forgive commanders who disobeyed direct orders. Finally, Kyle gave the command, "Activate emergency systems." Deep inside thousands of Dravarian warships, backup reactors came online, weapons that the Terrans had not disabled began charging, and the fleet prepared for one final attack. General Vance watched the energy readings rise and immediately understood what was happening. His officers waited for the order to fire, but Vance simply said, "Open the corridor." The officer stared at him. "Sir, if we open the formation, they'll attack Earth," Vance replied. No. They'll attack the ships they think are protecting Earth, and that's exactly what we need them to do. The 10,000 Terran warships suddenly moved apart, creating a massive corridor through the center of the fleet. Kale looked at the opening and believed the humans had finally made a mistake. He ordered every Dravarian vessel to accelerate through the corridor. Thousands of ships surged forward, at once. But halfway through, the stars around them disappeared. Not because of darkness, but because something enormous had moved between them and the galaxy. Kyle looked through the viewport and froze. Beyond the Terran fleet stood a second formation, then a third, then a fourth, each larger than the previous one. Hundreds of thousands of Terran ships had emerged from hidden positions beyond the solar system surrounding the Dravarian fleet from every direction. The tactical officer whispered, "Admiral, I am detecting more than 100,000 vessels." Kale slowly sat down, his hands shaking. The 10,000 were only the first line. The Terran commander opened a channel. "Admiral Kale, now you understand why we asked you to leave." Kale looked at the endless human fleet and whispered, "How long have you been building this?" Vance answered. "Since humanity realized the galaxy was capable of destroying itself," Kale asked. "Why hide it?" Vance replied. "Because we didn't want an arms race. The galaxy had spent centuries building bigger weapons, stronger fleets, and more destructive technology. Humanity had watched all of it without participating. Instead, humans had invested in logistics, shipbuilding, artificial intelligence, defensive networks, long-range transportation, and most importantly, infrastructure. The result was not simply a large military, it was an industrial civilization capable of replacing losses faster than any known empire. Kale finally understood the terrifying difference. The galaxy had focused on creating powerful ships. Humanity had focused on creating the ability to build ships forever. Then the Dravarian Emperor appeared on the communication screen, his expression filled with anger. "Human commander, you have violated the authority of the Galactic Council." Vance looked at him calmly. "Your fleet entered our territory without permission." The Emperor replied, "Earth is a member of the galaxy. Therefore, the galaxy has the right to determine what happens to your world." Vance smiled slightly. "No, Emperor. That's exactly where you are wrong." The Emperor demanded an explanation. Vance answered, "Humanity is part of the galaxy, but Earth belongs to humanity. The difference is important." The Emperor ordered the remaining Dravarian fleet to attack, but Kale refused. "Your Majesty, stop!" the Emperor shouted. "Execute the order." Kale looked around his bridge at the terrified crew, then looked toward the enormous Terran fleet and finally said, "No." The Emperor's face turned cold. "What did you say?" Kale answered. "I said no. My soldiers came here believing they were fighting a weak civilization. You knew they were walking into a trap." Kale looked directly at the Emperor. "You sent us here knowing you had no idea what humanity was capable of." The Emperor cut the transmission, but Kale's decision changed everything. Several Dravarian commanders followed him and powered down their weapons completely, then other allied civilizations began doing the same. One by one, the invasion fleet stopped obeying the Emperor's orders, and the Galactic Council watched as the most powerful empire in the region began losing control of its own military. But General Vance knew the situation was not over, because intelligence reports had detected another fleet approaching the solar system. This one did not belong to the Dravarians, and it was much larger. An officer rushed into the command center. "General, we're detecting a massive formation entering from the galactic core," Vance asked. "Whose fleet?" The officer shook his head. "Unknown." Vance looked at the display, and for the first time his expression became serious, because the approaching fleet was not using conventional hyperspace technology. It was moving through normal space at impossible speed. Dravarian scientists began analyzing the signal and suddenly discovered something terrifying. The fleet was not approaching Earth, it was approaching the Dravarian Empire. Kale received the warning and immediately asked Vance, "What is happening?" Vance replied, "Something has been watching the galaxy for a very long time." Kale looked confused. "What does that have to do with humanity?" Vance answered. "Everything, because humanity wasn't preparing for you." Kale stared at him. "Then who were you preparing for?" Vance looked toward the stars and said, "We don't know, but 70 years ago, Our astronomers detected something beyond the edge of the galaxy, an object moving toward us. Humanity realized that if the object was hostile, no single civilization could survive it. So Earth began preparing in silence. Kyle looked at the approaching fleet, and suddenly the meaning of humanity's secret military buildup became clear. The 10,000 ships were never meant to conquer the galaxy. The 100,000 ships were never meant to intimidate the Council. Humanity had been building a shield, not an empire. And now the shield was finally needed, because the unknown fleet had entered the galaxy, and every civilization could see its size. Millions of ships filled the tactical displays, moving toward the galactic core like an unstoppable storm. The Galactic Council sent a transmission demanding identification, but there was no response. Instead, every communication network across the galaxy received the same message. Humanity, we remember you. Kale stared at the words. Why would they know humanity? Vance answered. Because they were here before us? The message changed, revealing a final sentence. You were never supposed to survive. General Vance stood silently as every Terran warship began powering its weapons. The galaxy had spent decades believing humanity was afraid of war, but now the truth was finally becoming impossible to hide. Humans had not been waiting for someone to attack them. They had been waiting for the day they would finally need everything they had built, and as the enormous enemy fleet moved closer, Vance transmitted one message across every human military channel. All Terran fleets, this is no longer a defensive operation. Prepare for total mobilization. For the first time in 70 years, humanity stopped hiding. And somewhere beyond the edge of the galaxy, something ancient finally realized that Earth had been watching it too. For the first time in recorded galactic history, every major civilization stopped fighting among themselves and looked toward the same enemy. Millions of unidentified warships were moving through the galaxy, their formation stretching across thousands of light years, and wherever they passed, entire communication networks disappeared. Planetary defenses went offline and colonies simply stopped responding. The Galactic Council finally understood why humanity had remained silent for 70 years. The humans had not been hiding because they were weak. They had been preparing for something the rest of the galaxy had never even noticed. Deep inside Earth's primary command center, General Marcus Vance stood before the largest strategic display ever constructed. More than 100,000. Terran warships were already moving toward the galactic frontier, while additional fleets emerged from hidden shipyards across distant systems. Admiral Kale watched the display beside him, still struggling to understand the scale of human preparation. How many ships do you actually have? He asked. Vance looked at him for a moment before answering. Enough. Kale frowned. That's not a number, Vance replied. It's the only number that matters, because if humanity had revealed the true size of its military, the galaxy would have united against Earth years ago. Kale finally understood. Humans had deliberately allowed the galaxy to underestimate them, because fear would have created an arms race, but underestimation created something much more valuable. Time and humanity had used every year of that time to build, research, colonize, and prepare. Suddenly the main display changed, showing the unknown fleet entering the outer edge of the Terran defense zone. Millions of enemy ships appeared across the screen, but instead of panicking, the Terran command center became strangely calm. Every officer knew exactly what to do, because humanity had practiced this scenario thousands of times. Vance gave a simple order. Activate the silent network. Across the galaxy, dormant Terran installations awakened. Hidden satellites changed position. Artificial moons opened their outer shells. Asteroid bases revealed enormous weapons, and thousands of previously invisible shipyards launched their fleets. The Galactic Council watched in disbelief as the number of Terran vessels continued. Increasing, 10,000 became 100,000. 100,000 became 500,000, and then millions of human ships appeared across the strategic map. Kale stared at the display and whispered, "You had all of this hidden," Vance answered. "We had to." The unknown fleet suddenly transmitted a message, and this time it was not addressed to humanity alone. It was broadcast to every civilization. "Your galaxy belongs to us now. Surrender your worlds and your species will survive. The council leader immediately demanded to know who they were. The answer came. We are the Dominion of the Outer Dark. We have crossed galaxies before yours. Civilizations have risen and disappeared while we remained, and now your region is next. The council leader asked why they had come. The Dominion answered, because your galaxy contains the only species capable of resisting us, humanity. Every eye in the council chamber turned toward the Terran representative, who simply remained silent. The Dominion continued. For 70 years we watched your species. We expected fear, isolation, and eventual submission. Instead, you built a fleet, then another, and now you have become the greatest military power in this galaxy. Vance finally opened a communication channel. You made one mistake, the Dominion responded. What mistake? Vance said. You thought we were preparing to defeat you. The Dominion remained silent. Vance continued. We were preparing to make sure you never reached anyone else. Then the first Terran fleet appeared directly in front of the Dominion armada, followed by millions more, forming an enormous defensive wall across the galactic frontier. The Dominion opened fire, thousands of weapons illuminated the darkness, but the Terran fleet did not retreat. Instead, the human ships activated a defensive network that had been developed decades earlier. Each ship connected to the others, sharing energy, targeting information, shield strength, and tactical calculations. A single Terran warship became part of a network containing millions, and suddenly the Dominion's weapons were no longer striking individual targets. They were striking one interconnected defense system. Vance watched the energy readings and gave another order. Phase 2, activate. The Terran fleet disappeared, not by cloaking, but by moving. Millions of ships accelerated simultaneously, using a coordinated propulsion system appearing behind the Dominion fleet before the enemy could react. Kale stared at the tactical display. They just moved through the entire formation. Vance nodded. Humanity spent 70 years learning how to make an entire fleet think like one organism. The Dominion attempted to counterattack, but the human fleet was already moving again. Every maneuver was synchronized, every attack calculated, every retreat planned. The galaxy watched as the enormous Dominion armada slowly lost formation, then lost communication, then lost control. For the first time, the invaders experienced something they had never encountered in thousands of years, an enemy that refused to fight according to predictable patterns. Human commanders constantly changed tactics, adapting to every Dominion response, and when the enemy developed a countermeasure, humanity created another one, because humans had learned the oldest lesson of Earth. Survival belonged to the species that adapted faster. The battle continued for hours, then days, and eventually weeks. But humanity refused to stop. Entire Terran fleets were damaged, thousands of ships were lost, and millions of human soldiers never returned home. Yet every destroyed ship was replaced, every broken defense was rebuilt, every lost position was reinforced. The Dominion finally realized the truth. Humanity wasn't simply fighting them. Humanity was outlasting them. The Dominion commander transmitted directly to Vance. Why do you continue? Your losses are enormous. Vance answered. Because Earth taught us something your civilization never learned, the Dominion asked. What? Vance replied. We don't need to win every battle. We only need to survive long enough to learn how to win the war. The Dominion commander remained silent, and then something unexpected happened. Several alien civilizations that had once feared humanity joined the Terran fleet. The Dravarian Empire was the first. Admiral Kale ordered every remaining Imperial ship to follow Earth. Then the Vaer, the Solari, the Carthan, and dozens of other civilizations joined. Until the human fleet was no longer alone, the galaxy had finally understood that humanity's silence had never been a threat to them. It had been an invitation to survive together. The Dominion fleet began retreating toward the edge of the galaxy, but Vance refused to pursue them. Kale asked why. You could destroy them, Vance answered. We could, but that's not what we're here for. Then Vance transmitted a final message to the Dominion. Leave this galaxy and we will not follow you, but if you return you will find us waiting. The Dominion fleet disappeared into deep space, and for several minutes nobody spoke. The battle was over, but humanity's greatest secret was finally exposed. Hidden records revealed that Earth had built not only warships, but entire mobile shipyards, artificial planets, autonomous defense systems, and deep space colonies capable of supporting billions of people. The 10,000 warships that had shocked the galaxy at the beginning of the crisis had never been humanity's full military force. They had been the smallest fleet Earth was willing to reveal. Admiral Kale eventually asked General Vance the question every civilization wanted answered. Why did humanity remain silent for so long? Vance looked through the command center window at Earth glowing peacefully below them and said, "Because we knew that if the galaxy ever saw what humanity was capable of, it would either fear us or try to use us," Kale asked. "And now, what happens?" Vance smiled. "Now they know the truth. Humanity doesn't want to rule the galaxy. It doesn't want to conquer planets, and it doesn't want an empire. It simply wants the freedom to decide its own future." Kale nodded slowly, and then he looked toward the stars, where millions of Terran warships remained in formation, the same ships the galaxy had once believed were impossible. He finally understood the lesson humanity had taught them. Silence was not always surrender, patience was not always weakness, and peace was not always fear. Sometimes the quietest civilization in the galaxy was simply the one preparing for the day when everyone else would finally realize how dangerous it could become. And as the Terran fleet slowly returned toward Earth, a final transmission from General Vance spread across the galaxy. "We never wanted to become the strongest species. In the galaxy, we only wanted to make sure nobody could ever decide our fate for us and somewhere beyond the stars." The last surviving Dominion commander looked back at the galaxy they had failed to conquer and whispered the words that would eventually become known throughout the universe. "We mistook humanity's silence for fear, and that was the mistake that almost destroyed us." Have you ever seen anything you can't explain like aliens? If yes, tell us in the comments, share this video, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.